Hello and welcome to my Friday Lives, where I have different guests each Friday, and we go through and highlight some important things about their work and how you can work with them if it is something that you need or something that you want more information on. Today, I have Dr. Carrie Graham, who I am inviting as we speak. Let's see if we can work this. And she is a communications expert, which is extremely important in today's society because, let's see, hold on one second. Hi, Sylvia. Yay. Let's find her. There we go. Hold on one second. Oh, no. Where did she just go? There she is. Oh my gosh. There we go. Okay. She joined, and now hopefully she will be able to come on our live and we can talk more with her. Again, she's a communications expert and really helps entrepreneurs work their courses in such a way that it really speaks to their ideal audience. So sometimes we are communicating with each other, but we might not necessarily be speaking the same language. So even if we're speaking English, a definition of a word, let's see if she can arrive. There we go. Hold on one more time. We might be using, there she is. Yeah. Awesome.
I'm sweating.
It happens. It happens. It's nerve-wracking.
Absolutely.
Well, how are you? Thank you so much for joining. I was just introducing, I don't know if you heard, but I'm so happy to have you because I really, really, really think this is so important. And just as an introduction, how did you move into adult learning, and how that was so critical and special for course makers, or even before that, even before you worked with entrepreneurs? How did this kind of journey start?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say, Crystal, thank you so much for having me. This is all bizarre and crazy, and so thank you for being my first.
I love it. Yay.
Yes, but how I got here has really evolved. I graduated with a degree in sports medicine, and so I worked in healthcare, Division I college athletics first as an athletic trainer, and then I transitioned to teaching. So I moved from the athletic side of a campus to the academic side of the campus. And what I found through that experience from an administrative perspective is that so often, so often, we're required to go, as a healthcare provider, I was required to go through annual trainings, which after a decade, I was like, they could do better, right? But then, as a state employee, we're required to go through Title IX training, sexual harassment training, and I would look around, and while that information was important to me, I could tell that the way it was being delivered, it was falling flat amongst my peers. So this went on for another decade, and then I had the opportunity to get my PhD, and I really wanted to be in a position where I could elicit change from a systematic perspective. So I was doing this teaching and refining those skills, but then I had this growing passion of an understanding of language and how we as adults, when we are attempting to learn something, language becomes such a critical part of that, right? And so if you even think about relationships, if you're meeting someone for the first time, there's really, you have to get on the same page, so to speak, in terms of the language that you're using to make that connection. And the same holds true with the learning experience for an adult. Actually, I'll just share this. This morning, I was on the phone with a utility company, and the person that was helping me was, they were speaking not only fast, but they were using language that I just didn't know.
Mm.
And so I was missing it, right? Like I wasn't understanding anything that they were trying to help me with. And that's the same thing. It was a short learning experience that it wasn't going well.
But that is so fascinating because as you mention it, even so, if you literally don't speak the same language, like if you're speaking to a French person or you're speaking to a Spanish person or you know, and you move into more of hand gestures and movement and things of that. So, and it's frustrating because you can't get your point across. So I can imagine how you are looking at seeing that when we speak the same language, when we are literally speaking the English language and it's not translating. And
Absolutely. And the part, that's why I do have a focus, an interest, I should say, an interest on language and how we communicate with one another and how we listen in particular. But when we think about the learning experience for adults, there's a way to present information versus not presenting information so that the adult learner actually gets whatever the knowledge is as well as develops those skills.
so, what is the difference then between how we present it to a child and versus how we present it to an adult? And when do we make that shift? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. So from a developmental perspective, if you look at theories in adult learning, neuroscience, the brain, the executive system of the brain doesn't fully develop until the mid 20s. And so that's why
Mm,
you have college students making very poor decisions, you
really?
know? Yeah.
I wasn't one
So,
of it.
we'll just put that aside. But when we think about making decisions and really acquiring that information for children versus adults, if you think about it, a child they're a blank slate. They have no prior knowledge, no prior experience really in anything. And so as they're receiving information that they're being taught, it's often for the first time,
Mm.
or it's not the first time, but they have really a limited amount of things to compare it to. Whereas the adult, we have this wonderful life full of experiences that we bring to the learning experience, right? So whenever, for example, I am a new grandmother and I don't know anything. Thank you. I don't know anything about little kids. And so and they're boys. So I did some research, right? And I was looking for something to solve a problem that I'm having in my life, right?
Mm.
Which is how to connect with young boys. And I got the information. I decided what information I needed, sought it out, got it, consumed it, and have applied it. Children don't have that ability. They don't know what they need. They don't know what they don't know. And so that's really the big difference between adults and children. And unfortunately, and I made this mistake early on in my teaching career, is you you can teach an adult the same way you teach a child. However, it's not effective,
Mm.
right? So with you as an expert in your field or as a coach or as a consultant, a business owner, you have your clients before you and now you are just talking at them, you're giving them this a ton of information. that makes it really difficult for someone who has a wealth of life experience to actually consume and make sense of when they're just provided information without being active learners in that.
And what struck me in you saying that is if children are a blank slate, and and I kind of take this as okay, they say you're the average of the five people you hang out with, and children almost don't have a choice of really who they hang out with, and so whoever they're gathering or getting the input or the information from isn't necessarily by choice, it's almost by circumstance.
Correct.
So how does that affect, people of color and, differences in boys of color versus women of color and or men of color, I should say, and women of color and the range of what information and who is actually giving it to them or how they are receiving it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I have found in the last 2 years as a country, there's this spotlight being shown on diversity and using inclusive language. And in my research that I've published, one of the things that I talk about really early on is the distinction between saying, oh, we've got people who are diverse or people who are of color. And that's, I'm not going to say it's fine. It is what it is. However, that simple use of language of color, oh, they're diverse, it groups so many people
Mm.
together that it totally ignores the rich cultures of various ethnicities, people from different regions of the country. And so, that alone, like if we're talking about learning and communication, that one word alone has such a large impact that oftentimes people don't recognize. And so we get into the use of language that we're accustomed to or that's commonplace, but we're not really using our language intentionally.
So in that, how what can be said or how do we speak, especially because I just did, I just did it. I grouped everyone in one little bubble. So
Right.
how do I be better?
So
How,
one of the things that I have encouraged people as it relates to language that I've encouraged people to do is to, if you're speaking about a person from a specific cultural identity. So instead of saying Hispanics, like there's so many countries, right?
right.
So if you have the opportunity to name those countries,
Mm,
right? And
okay.
if you are unaware of who is included in that comment, I have switched to using the language of across diverse not diverse, across ethnic identities.
Mm,
Because when you use that language, it really is inclusive.
right. Across
And so
ethnic.
now across ethnic identities. And so
Okay.
you pull that into the learning experience for adults. And again, when we talk about nutrition,
Mm,
I was speaking with a client yesterday and about one of her clients and nutrition education. And so when how people eat is so bound by their culture that you want to use language that acknowledges and honors the culture that they are identifying with.
so true. And eating not only I I mean we could that
Yeah,
is another that's another IG live for a
yeah,
time. But again, yeah, if you food, it brings people together and it's the familial, like let's eat and let's be happy and joyous and
and communicate with each other and tell you our days and what's going on and new grandchildren and things of that nature. So I think it is important, and each culture has that different relationship to food, and
Mhm.
what and wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
One of the
So
to bring it all together, one of the examples that I use it with my clients is picture this. You have your ideal clients, right? And those are ultimately people that you want to invite to your dinner party.
mm,
So you have
mm,
very specific type of people at your dinner party. Well, now you all are sitting around the table and you want to have a conversation about how this beautiful mug was made, right? And you have one person who's never seen a drinking tool ever in their life. You have another person who just uses it, right? Like it serves their purpose. And then the third person is someone who is from generations of cup manufacturing.
mm.
How do you have a conversation? So you've invited these people and they're there because they want to be at your dinner party and engage in conversation. But how do you have a conversation about something that's meaningful when each person doesn't have the same frame of reference? They don't have the same experience with that item. You have to be very careful in how, or intentional in how you use your language.
I absolutely love it. And I was going to bring up, I was looking at your IG feed, and um, there's something that says comfort versus strength, and that is equal value. So can you explain that? And because I found that interesting, and what that means to not only the person creating the courses, but also the adult learner. What does
Yeah.
that represent?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. That one in particular just speaks straight to my heart. It really does. So people that know me personally know that I'm a pretty reserved and quiet person. However, my career has required me to be in front of others, public speaking, presenting at international conferences. I'm not comfortable doing it. But what's funny is people consistently say, "Oh, you speak with such grace. You were amazing." And I really value those compliments. And so when I think about people who are trying to facilitate a course for the very first time and they have this sense of nervousness or fear, I
Mm,
encourage people to think about, because this is what I do, think about what makes you comfortable first. What
okay.
are those things that help you calm down? For me, it's making a grocery list or a to-do list, right? So like 2 minutes before I'm about to take the stage, you might see me writing and I guess people would think I'm taking notes. I'm really making a grocery list,
Like
right?
potatoes and little garlic
Yep.
and
Absolutely. Right. Like to get my mind off of it. And then because it helps me detach from the moment. And then
Mhm.
they call me up and I'm just able to speak, right? I don't have time to get emotionally caught up in the event. So there's that. That's the level of comfort. There's also the piece around strength, right? So what are your natural strengths? For me, because I was such a shy child, I really learned early how to be an effective and empathetic listener.
Mm,
And so when I'm in a teaching environment where I'm slightly uncomfortable, I use the thing that I'm good at, which is asking questions. And so I've learned to leverage that as one of my strengths when I can. So, again, when I'm working with someone who has to teach or is venturing to teach a course for the first time, I just encourage them, let's look at these two things equally. You have to look at them equally, and that will empower you to be your best self in that experience.
which is Now that you explain that, it makes complete sense. Because I use strength as our strength, but more of the feeling of more power. And and so I think it can be integrated, but I really love when you say, detach from the situation and then look at where you actually excel and what you can actually bring to the table, which is
Right. Because one of the things that I found is, and this goes back to my days in healthcare taking continuing education, is you have someone who is strong in content knowledge, that's their strength, but yet it's over everyone's head, and they're stiff, and they're just presenting the information and nothing else, right? Like there's no personality, there's no invitation to connect personally. And I would argue, if you have the ability to calm, right, you then are more willing to remove the shell of I have to create distance, which most people end up doing. And I think the quickest way to do that is to identify those things that just help bring you comfort and tap into that.
and it's again with I love how your voice changed one when you were like, everybody is very, the posture changed and the voice changed, and it was very straightforward and there was no intonation. And we've all been to a meeting, or we've all, seen that. And is that part of the nervousness or the anxiety of the presenter, or is it simply just, done and get it over with, and what they get, they get, and if they don't, then sorry about your luck.
Right.
um when I'm taking notes, so if I'm looking
Yeah.
down, I'm furiously scribbling, and cannot read my writing. um Also, there was another thing that you mentioned, and we had talked about this a little bit earlier, but with people bringing different experiences, and especially across ethnic identities,
Mhm.
how with entrepreneurs, they are, asked to niche down or find the ideal client or the target audience or the right fit client. And there's so many different, now there's so many different of those.
Right.
So how do you how do you speak to your niche or ideal client, but still have a broadness where it's not um, divisive, or that it's not welcoming, we'll say, to someone who is like, oh my god, but that's interesting, like I might not be in this lineup of
Mhm.
psychosocial and demographics, but maybe I want to, I don't know, like it sounds interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I have, excuse me, I'm not going to claim to have mastered what you're asking. I'm not going to say that. However, the approach that I take, and it's been effective, is that depending upon the message that I want to I want to present, excuse me, I will either speak very generally, and in that regard, it's an invitation for anyone to consume that information. Or if I'm speaking, so to speak, my ideal client niche down, I'm going to present information that is very narrow in focus, right? So one
Can
of
I
the things that,
I'm
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
is it the same information, just
It
present?
is.
Okay.
It's just
Hmm.
presented differently. So, for example, you commented on that image of strength and comfort are equal, right? And it caught your attention. And it's just a very basic illustration, right? However, in another platform, I've spoken about the comparison between using our strengths, using our levels of comfort and combining them in detail. So
Mm,
in the Instagram post, it was for general consumption, right? And so the concept was just, it was presented in a way that it's like, oh, okay, that's something I can use in skateboarding or playing the piano, you know? I don't
right.
know. Um,
Hey.
when when I want to address that concept with my proposed clients, I'm going to talk about it with more detail. And that's one of the ways, again, to use language, right? So we can still have that same converse. I'm talking about the same thing. It just depends on who my audience is. And so I'm tailoring my language to support the audience.
And I think I find that difficult. And
Mhm.
because it's been told to me, several times, and when I try to, well, when I try to change change my language, it ends up coming out awkward, like the very stiff person who has no personality and no intonation, and it's like, oh my God, and so I'm in that kind of rut of I I I understand it, but for me it's very challenging to kind of switch the or make the switch. So that's
Yeah.
something that I have to work on.
One of the it's you I have two thoughts. So more in line with what we're talking about, one piece of advice that I would give is think of whatever your topic is, think of the very broad and general concepts within that topic, right? So if we do nutrition, eat the My Plate,
Hmm.
right? Years ago, it was eat the food pyramid. However, if you're in a coaching session around nutrition, you're going to have a conversation about let's look at micronutrients, macronutrients, proteins. If you're speaking to the general public, you may not need to have that conversation. So that would just be one piece of advice that I would offer as you're trying to balance the same topic, different audiences. The more personal thought that I have as you posed that, as you shared your struggle, is, and I don't know if you've heard of this before, but what's referred to as code switching, and it is often done by African Americans, or it's often talked about in relationship to African American individuals, yeah, at
That
work. Hmm.
So that's where I had heard it from.
Yeah. And so as an African American woman, that is something that I have engaged in, right? So I've had conversations. Oh, my mother, I love her to death. She has an insurance background. I have a sports medicine background. And so she'll ask me a healthcare question, and I simply answer it like, Mommy, this is what you do, right? However, when I'm at work, when I would be at work and there was the same question by a professional colleague, in that regard, my tone would change and how I present information is very different. The
mm,
references that I would use were very different.
because simply because of your audience, or as an African American woman that you felt that it had to be that way, or
I would say the first really influenced the second. So the environment that I was, for me, I can't speak for anyone else, the environment that I was in, predominant, well, really all white, mostly men, um, with lots of expectations around behavior, right? Um, and we'll
you can
just
throw
leave
an
it at
F-bomb in if you need to, or
that. We'll
you
just leave it at that. We'll just leave it at that. And so because of that and the what I knew were the biases directed toward me, okay, if we're in this setting, I already know that you have an assumption about me. the least I can do it for myself really is to use a language or a form of language that you can appreciate. And that's just something that how I've navigated the world. I can't say that it's right, it's wrong, or others have done that, but that's simply how I've navigated the world.
Right. Well, and like you said, if that was available to you, and then, you know, I feel, for me, I feel like we people who, we have to do what we feel is
Yeah,
necessary and right for us, and other people
absolutely.
can do what is necessary and right for them. And
Absolutely.
um I think, you know, even along the lines of this past year and things, that's, those lines have blurred, and it's become, well, what you do, what you think is not
Yeah.
right, and what you think, you know, and it's like, oh my God, okay. um
Right.
so in with code switching,
Mhm.
how do you, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's lost on me. How do you know what you're, I mean, is it that you pick the audience that you are directing it to, or how do you know who is even consuming your your content?
Well, let me first do this. Let me draw the line in saying the way in which I have used code switching has only been in relationship to my work within institutions, specifically higher education.
Okay.
And I mean that's like a whole another thing.
we got
Um,
we got so many IG lives to do.
yeah, like that's just crazy. So that's where code switching shows up for me. And I brought it up because you were talking about like how do you know what like how deep to go on a topic or what you share with one audience versus another audience. And it reminded me of that. And so I want to draw the line between that and then as a business owner or an entrepreneur communicating your messaging. Um, but I I say that and then I just thought of advertising, right? And so if you think about how companies advertise Coca-Cola, let's just say, they advertise to the African American community one way, they advertise during the holidays, the traditional Christmas season in another way, around Thanksgiving, their marketing looks different. And so in having the conversation about business owners and entrepreneurs, how do you switch your messaging? I think that's a great example of it.
Mhm. Just look at the larger
Hmm.
companies.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings me, I guess, to, because you mentioned that you first started with athletes and then moved into the classroom and more academics. And within my health and wellness, and kind of yoga, I wanted to work with athletes because I feel like in their training and in the traditional athletic sense, physical training is always front and center, first, foremost, and there is no, and then there's a lot of injury, and then there's, okay, well, you have to not only be a student athlete, but now you have to keep a 3.0 because now you have the scholarship that got you in, you know, and it's a whole, like, they go in, and then since you are an athlete, you're supposed to be on this higher level that nothing bothers you, and you're just supposed to let it all roll off your back, and there's
Yeah.
no, yeah, like there's no real resources for them. So I started in that direction as well, and communicating with athletes, and even communicating with soccer players versus baseball players versus uh,
That's it.
lifter. I mean, that's a whole other realm. So
Yeah.
how did you find when you were speaking to, an athlete versus in the classroom to students, was that the same as shifting your message of,
Yeah.
even though,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So actually, my first job out of grad school, I'm not going to name names, but it was working at an Ivy League school. So I would have student athletes who wouldn't show up to rehab. And
mm,
I'm like, wait a minute, like, coach, you got to do something, right? And the coach, what was told to me is our athletes are not going to become professional athletes. They're going to go on to be CEOs. And if they need to miss treatment because they're studying, we're okay with that. And
wow.
that was just sort of, and I appreciated it. Once it was explained to me, I was like, oh yeah, like you missed because you were studying. I'm on board. But so I was at an Ivy League school, and then I went to a Division I school on the West Coast,
Mm,
high level. Many of those athletes went on to be professional athletes, Olympians and such. And
wow.
so how I spoke about someone's rehab at an Ivy League school, it's the same conversation ultimately. But how I'm speaking to someone who is about to enter the draft
Mm,
or, going to the Final Four, same injury, the way in which I communicated that message was slightly different. And then the way I talked to my mother about the same injury, like it's
and,
totally different.
and the coaches as well,
And the coaches as
and
well.
the athletic directors. I mean,
Yeah,
I would, in my kind of quest, I would start with, I'm like, I'll just go to the top because the top trickles down, and the top, I thought in my
right.
naivety that, the top makes the decisions, and, you know, and then you find out, and
Right.
it's such a convoluted,
That's the perfect word for it. It is.
it's amazing. So how, and I guess I did have to change my message depending on, okay, these people are, yeah, they're athletic directors, but they're all administrative. Like, they don't know the field from the, court. Like, they don't get it in a
Right.
certain sense,
Yes. Yes.
and then, the coaches, all what they care about, and then on down the line um to the little people, to the
Yeah.
interns, the athletic trainers that were like, I'm doing, this is free because I need hours. And
Right.
like, it's so fascinating.
Yeah. And another thing is, you mentioned you have children, and so how you talk about the importance of looking both ways when you cross the street to
Mm,
a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old, it's totally different, but it's basically the same concept.
right.
Hmm.
Well, and well, I don't have children.
Oh, you don't. I'm sorry.
No, 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 that's okay. I have nieces and nephews, and they,
Close enough. Close enough.
exactly, yes. I get to
Close
see
enough.
their life, and enjoy, from afar. But how do you, so in that same, because what I'm finding in my work is that, um, how we want to perhaps protect, kids, make sure you look both ways before you cross the street, and that's a general, we'll say, statement. It's not,
Yeah.
there's the intention behind it isn't necessarily, but then when the parent kind of moves into their fear and projecting those fears onto the child, perhaps in a well, you can't be an artist because artists don't make any money, or you can't, you can't skydive because your parachute might not open. And so
Right.
how do parents or even course creators not necessarily project their stuff, maybe that they haven't dealt with, onto those that they are actually trying to help?
Yeah, one of the tips that I offer in working with adults is not about you. Like
Mm,
you might be the expert, you might be the coach, but this learning experience is not about you. It's about whoever is in front of you. And so, one, I think acknowledging that statement first and foremost is a great start. Consistently reminding yourself throughout the time with your clients, but also really take time to understand who they are, right? So if I'm meeting with you as a client, excuse me, today, well, Crystal, tell me a little bit about yourself, right? And so I my statements to you shouldn't consistently be, well, I believe and I think and, about I, because
mm.
you have a wealth of experience as an adult, but rather, well, Crystal, here is one way you can use this mug. What do you think about that? Okay, Tony, tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay, well, Tony, I'm curious, what do you think about using this mug? Your answers are going to be different because you are different. My suggestions to you are more meaningful because they're tailored directly to you, and it's not about me. My intention and attention is all focused on the client. And my experience, and I was guilty of that as a first-time teacher to college students was I have all this experience. Let me just tell you about me. I don't know what I was thinking, right? Like, but in the reality is, as I've evolved over 2 decades, I rarely talk about myself in the learning environment.
And I completely agree. And I think, they say beginner's mind as, almost that blank slate. Like, even
Yeah.
when someone is speaking to what you might have experience in, it's still not going to be the same experience. They're not going to generate the information the same as you are. And I think for entrepreneurs, we get caught in that comparison, and the whole gamut of, well, she's much better, or she's making whatever it is that your fear is, instead of, oh my gosh, but who resonates with me, and who resonates with how I am speaking the same information, the same message, um, but differently. And
Yeah, yeah. You reminded me. I had a earlier this week I had a consultation with someone who has to build her entire curriculum. And she's going to work with me. But one of the things that she said was, Carrie, I was on your website and I saw calm consultation. And she said that word calm really resonated with me. She goes,
mm,
I was so anxious and stressed about this undertaking. And she said, to just see the word calm consultation drew me to you. And now that we've had this conversation, you have such a calming presence, and I want to work with you, right? And I'm thinking, use the language, right? Like use the language. Because there was a time when I was like, let me just say it's a consultation and be done with it, right? But, again, I had my reasons for including the word calm in there. But it's the same concept. We're having a consultation. Like,
Right.
like we're just having a consultation, but the use of the word, like the adjective that I included, it made an impact for her. And then it is a part of who I am, right? Like being calm is a part of my personality. It's something that I really strive to share with others, and it came through.
And as you're mentioning, that's when you, because I've done this myself, I see something and I'm like, oh my God. Or I come up with this idea and it's, it's really not me, but it
Yeah.
sounds like super great, but you know, and it doesn't go anywhere because there's not me in it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that took a long time to really sink in. Of course, I'm
Yeah.
stubborn, so that beat my head against the wall for 20 years before something actually gets
Right.
there.
Right. But that's the thing. You can be you and not make it about you. You know,
Right.
when I started teaching, it was about me. And then I like transitioned to I'm going to take the me out of it, but yet I still didn't put my personality in it. And
Mm.
so there was still a disconnect. And it was when I allowed my personality to be a part of my facilitation and my teaching that it just got flipped on its head. I mean, there was a waiting list. People were clamoring to work with me. And I was like, it's the same class. And they're just like, you gotta get in Dr. Graham's class. Like, it's amazing. And, again, it's the balance between taking you out of it and making it about the other person, but allowing your personality to be the thing that connects you.
Your flair.
Yeah,
Like,
play it.
yes. So, speaking of, how do people, um, who do you work with? What is your ideal client? And how can people work with you?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So I have a passion, I'll say, for working with individuals who are business owners, whether they're new in the experience or seasoned, and they have some level of curriculum that they are either creating from the ground up or they need a really good revision thereof.
Can I interrupt for 1 sec? Because I really like when you were switching can you explain curriculum and how you came to that? Because I really like that as well. And I think it's important for those seasoned or beginner business
Absolutely.
individuals.
Absolutely. So I will say I started as a course consultant, and in doing my research on others, what I realize is oftentimes people think, oh, I just want to do a course, right? When the reality is what they're trying to share, the information they're trying to share is best served in a workshop or,
Mm.
something, a self-guided book or whatever the case may be. And I didn't want to niche down into those areas. And so
Uh,
I use the word curriculum. And on my website, there's a video that explains it, but your curriculum takes shape of all of those. So think of it as an umbrella. Your curriculum is simply content that you want to share with the world, and it can take different formats. So
mm.
one format is a course, another is a one-on-one coaching, a workshop, excuse me, as I mentioned, a self-guided text or experience, and even a learning community, right?
Okay.
Like if there's some education there. So so that's where the word curriculum comes from. It is all encompassing. So I can support, I have the expertise to support those, any of those. And so to answer your question about who I work with, anyone who has any one of those things, right? And they particularly they work with adults. Because my PhD is in adult learning, and I've also published some research in mentoring and workplace learning. And so what I do is I support them by helping them develop or revise their work, but also implementing adult learning best practices to ensure that their curriculum is incredibly effective
Mm.
and connects with the adults.
And
And it's funny because I've worked with people who have these curriculums that have been around for 10 years, and they're like, Carrie, I didn't even know half the stuff you're saying. And I'm like, yeah, you've been making money off of your work and it's good stuff, but here's some other information to help elevate it. And they're like, I see the return on that already.
absolutely amazing. And just goes to show how deep that we get in, I don't want to say complacency, but our comfortability, or, well, I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it,
Yeah,
type
yeah,
deal,
yeah.
versus what could make it better, or, how could this be even more on fire?
Absolutely. And I've really, I've shared some insights with people, particularly around adults attempting and really attempting to navigate living through a pandemic and the impact that that has on adult learning as well. And so there are things that people can do to alter or enhance their existing work so that it still is connecting and people are completing the training or the learning, whatever the program may be.
So when or when business owners work with you, is there a specific, is it like a year program, a 6 month, a 3 week? Is it one-on-one versus group? How?
Yeah, it's definitely one-on-one because I firmly believe that there is no one size fits all. So, and I just like to talk to people. So it's a one-on-one experience, and it is 90 days. It's a 90-day program. However, it's really guided by the client because again, I'm paying attention to what are the client's needs, right?
Mhm.
And what pace can they work at? What other things are they engaged in their life? And that's all part of the adult learning theory, right? Is acknowledging their life experience. But it is 90 days. So we can start and you have 90 days to complete your project. And if you finish in 30 days, that's okay. I'm on retainer for 90 days. And so let's tap into it and enjoy, creating and refining and adding additional services to that. And I am taking clients now, even for the summer, as people are thinking about ideas for the fall or thinking about a summer program. And it's been great. And I take clients from across all industries. And that has been, I love that because I am a lifelong learner. So I have a client who's an attorney. I have another client who is in business, someone who's in IT, an engineer,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, another person who works with women executives in Europe. And it's just, I love it. I love it. Again, the concept is the same.
Right.
It's the audience. Like, what are their needs? How can I frame my suggestions to them in a way that is going to fit and land for their business?
And I love the I'll say diverse industries
Yeah.
in that I feel like you would get so many, and I think that's part of the challenge I have as well, as niching down, as you mentioned, because everyone, I find everyone just fascinating, and everyone brings a different, like, someone I work with here has made potentially an injury that I have to work with differently, and somebody over here is, I'm coaching in a different way, and it's everybody, I learn as well.
Yeah.
And so it's tough to, for my brain to be like, but speak to this, problem, and you can always, other people will always come, but um
Right, right. And that's, when I was starting, that was one of the things that I had to figure out and pare down. I early on I recognized I can't serve everyone, even though I would like to. And then, in all honesty, as a business owner, I have a passion for supporting other individuals who are starting up, individuals who are low income, in transition, whatever the case may be. But I am a business owner. And at the end of the day, the bottom line is the bottom line. Like, I
yeah,
think I think it would be foolish for us to have this conversation, or for other entrepreneurs to have these types of conversations and not talk about the reality. The reality is we're in business for a
to make
reason.
money.
Yeah, to make money. And so, um, I've had to change my client base because of that. Now, admittedly, I really struggled with it because I have a heart for supporting people like me. But what I realized through that process is that I have an opportunity to offer my services in a different way that supports them as well. And that is something that I'm really excited about.
And I'm completely where you are.
Mhm.
I'm getting a little feedback. It took me a long time as well, to
Yeah.
say, to really realize, okay, the reason I started this business, and how can I not rescue everyone? How can I empower them to feel like they can, when they're ready,
Mhm.
we can get
Mhm.
together. But I don't have to rescue or offer or